The 5 worst Wallabies moments ever. This top 5 was a tough list, and if you've seen our other video of the top 5 worst All Blacks moments ever, it was relatively a bit harder to create. Now, the reason isn't because there's no terrible moments, but more the difference in expected results, meaning easier to signify when the All Blacks have failed versus when the Wallabies have failed. However, saying that, I have found what I believe are the 5 worst Wallabies moments ever. Kicking off this list, in number 5, I've gone with the 2003 Rugby World Cup loss. The reason this is number 5 on the list, and not higher, because the moment itself, I think, hurts Wallabies fans more, but it's actually the build-up to the tournament. Could also have this as one of their best moments ever for the Wallabies. 2003 World Cup, played on home soil. We had some great moments from the Wallabies throughout the tournament. A world record win against Namibia, 142-0. That semi-final against the All Blacks with the Sterling Mortlock intercept. All for it to, culminate into the grand final, which was the Wallabies versus the English. And then that famous moment from Johnny Wilkinson, which tore the Wallabies' hearts to pieces, shredded it in two, and really, really hurt Wallaby fans. So I think this is one of the worst moments purely because of that reason. The fact that Johnny Wilkinson made that kick in extra time, the height that the Wallabies had got to at a home final with about 83,000 people watching in Sydney, for it to all kind of come crashing down in that moment, sees this being the 5th worst moment in Wallabies history. Moving on to number 4, and it may be recency bias, but I think it's that Bledisloe Cup moment, and you may be thinking, which one? But I think the recent one with Bernard Foley not kicking the ball out and being a turnover really did affect Wallaby fans, and the reason was we had seen an improvement of the last 2 years from the Super Rugby sides. We had seen Australian rugby kind of jumping back into the spotlight slightly. You had the great English series in the mid-season tests, and this was the All Blacks in Melbourne, a midweek test, a Thursday night test. The Wallabies had come back from 30-odd points down to pretty much win the game. And to have a decision like that end up changing the game, and the fact you could see that's another moment that just absolutely broke Wallabies fans. In number 3, I've gone with 2 specific games where I think you look back at the history of the Wallabies and you go, those games look terrible on the Wallabies record books. And a lot of people were probably thinking the 2009 game against Scotland, or the again recency bias with Italy beating the Wallabies. But I've actually gone with the 2011 game against Samoa. The year before, they had trounced Samoa like 74-10 or something like that. And then in 2011, 6 days before a Tri-Nations kickoff and 2 months before a Rugby World Cup kickoff, the Wallabies lost to Samoa in Sydney. It was one of the most famous victories in Samoan history, and for Australia, a dark day, and for a New Zealander leading them in Robbie Deans, it wasn't a good look. The other game is actually one we look quite a bit back in 1973, 50-odd years ago, where a little unknown Tongan side toured Australia and actually beat the Wallabies. It was the second test of their 2-game series, and 16-11 was the final score for this Tongan side touring Australia to get a famous win for them. So those 2 games really stood out as terrible losses on the record of the Wallabies. I know this is 5 worst Wallabies moments, but what I've actually done is brought in all of Rugby Australia, and specifically the Super Rugby losing streak. So in between 2016 and 2018, the Australian Super Rugby sides lost 40 in a row to New Zealand Super Rugby sides, and which is a mammoth record. I don't think we'll ever see it again. So many games be lost by a nation to another nation's provincial teams in the way that they did. It was highlighted with the biggest loss being a 71-6 victory of the Hurricanes over the Rebels, and it lasted from 2016 to 2018. Just a miserable time for Australian rugby, specifically after a post-World Cup where, they had made the final and only just lost the All Blacks in that final. And for this to then lead on to the next World Cup, a really disappointing time in Australia Rugby, including the Wallabies players that were playing in that Super Rugby competition. The worst moment, and I guess moments for the Wallabies, has to be the 20-year record now of the Bledisloe Cup. If you take any other competition in the Southern Hemisphere other than the Rugby World Cup, the Bledisloe is the most, I guess, prestigious and hotly contested one, at least up until 2003. In 2003, New Zealand won it and haven't let go of it since. And to be really, truthfully honest, haven't really looked like letting go of it. The times that the Wallabies came closest was 2007. They won the first test at the MCG, only to lose the second at Eden Park. In 2015, this happened as well. Won the first test in Stadium Australia, Sydney, only lose the next one in Eden Park. And again in 2019, a famous win in Perth, 47-26, only to be trounced 36-0 at Eden Park. So, I mean, I think that encompasses the worst moments in Australian rugby is how lacklustre they have been in the Bledisloe Cup. A long history of disappointments, and I guess when you look at it and you look at each individual result, it just hasn't been good enough by the Wallabies and Australian rugby, and that's why this 20-year history and this 20-year record has to be the worst thing in Australia rugby at the moment. Thanks for joining the Sports Booth today. I would love to hear what you think the worst moments in Australian rugby are. Are there any moments that I've missed? I look through all the red cards, and when I compare this to what I did with the All Blacks top 5 one, it's just their red cards don't come off as, I guess, cynical and as dirty. There are definitely some moments, Darcy Swain, yellow card incident, recency bias again, taking out Quintapaya. But again, I couldn't find many moments where it was just down dirty play. It's more been the losses that have hurt the Wallabies in Australian rugby more than anything else. But I'd love to know if there's a moment I've missed that you think definitely should be on this list. There's been no great World Cup exits where it's been really disappointing. The one I'd probably target is the 1987 Rugby World Cup. They went in as quite high favourites, and to lose that semi-final, a little bit disappointing. But yeah, not a lot of really bad moments in Australian rugby that stand out. Thank you for joining me today, though. If you had enjoyed, please remember to subscribe and like. Let me know if you want to see me do another team. I've done the All Blacks, now done the Wallabies. Shall I do the Springboks or maybe the English next? Let me know. But for now, goodbye.